gentlemen, it is 6:30, so we'll start this meeting, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I first of all want to point out that there is some filming at our meeting today. This is taking place in accordance with the Council standing orders by a gentleman on the right there. If I feel that any time it's disrupting the meeting, I can ask it to be stopped, and the operator has been asked to comply with the requests of myself and indeed the Council standing orders. The person undertaking the filming has agreed to ensure the filming will not be edited in any way, so that it could lead to misinterpretation of the proceedings. So thank you. It's not obstructing any member of the public and their views, so we'll continue the rest of the agenda. Item number 1, please, is apologies for absence.
No apologies for absence have been received.
Thank you very much. Item number 2 is minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of September. Just before we go through those page by page, just point out on the list of attendees by invitation, there's an error. Councillor P. Turner is not the Deputy Cabinet Member for HR, ICT and Customer Service, but indeed the Deputy Cabinet Member for Finance. And similarly, under item 31 little 1, that's on the bottom of page 3, in the resolution there, the community trigger threshold should read 44, not 42. Paragraph 44, not 42. Subject to those 2 amendments, are you happy to approve those minutes? Thank you. Item 3 is declarations of interest, and I'll take any if there are any from Cabinet members, or if anything arises during the meeting, please indicate and we'll speak up. So that's none. Thank you very much. Item number 4 is consideration of the petition received, Save Cobbles Farm, Stop the M40 Junction 3A plans. Excuse me. This is a petition with 1,670 signatures presented to last council meeting by Councillor Wood. Officers have verified that this meets the correct procedures, hence it's here for us to discuss this evening. In paragraphs 8 to 12 of the report is the response from the Cabinet Member for Planning on this matter, and this sets out the current situation as regards any possible junction in what is called 3A. This proposal is one of the matters outlined in the local plan, which will be discussed in more detail over the coming months. I'm unaware of any confirmation or otherwise that the Highways Agency would even entertain a junction at this location. So, Councillor Wood, I think you'd like to speak to your petition.
Yes, please, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to explain a little more regarding the background of this petition. I would like to reiterate it was signed by 1,617 people purely because they care enough about Cobbles Farm in Loudwater to raise awareness of its possible closure because of Junction 3A plans. As a consequence of the idea to provide a new motorway junction, published as part of the local plan options earlier this year, a local very successful riding stables and livery yard, Cobbles Farm, is threatened, and the possibility of this junction being placed here has far-reaching ramifications to the residents of this area. Whilst it is understood that there are no decisions as yet, this in itself has even worse consequences. Cobbles Farm is a valued local business, providing a home for many horses and other animals, a lot of whom have been rehomed there by the RSPCA and Horsewatch after difficult episodes in their lives. There are in excess of 300 local children on their books at any one time, learning to ride and enjoy the countryside, and they also provide regular lessons for the Bucksdown Syndrome Association. In addition to all the permanent and part-time staff they employ, Cobbles Farm also provides work experience for the local secondary schools and colleges and runs courses in riding and road safety, which are accredited by the British Horse Society. Cobbles Farm is a beautiful, peaceful idyll in a busy world, an ideal spot for a riding school and livery business. Any motorway junction in this area would without doubt mean the closure of the equestrian centre. The land would be compromised and levelled to accommodate the slip roads and link road. The sheer volume of traffic, noise and pollution, should Spring Lane be upgraded, would have a catastrophic effect on Cobbles Farm. It would also affect the public footpaths and bridleways which run through the property, which are all well used. There's no way a riding stables could operate adjacent to a motorway slip road. Remember, we are talking about animals here who carry young children. The owners and teachers could not risk an animal being frightened by the noise from cars and lorries thundering past. If the junction were to lead down Spring Lane or even near to it, then that would be the end of Cobbles Farm. The prospect of trying to find another property anywhere else to run such an enterprise is impossible, as it took many years to find this. The consultation and idea of this new junction is causing Mr and Mrs Curtis and their family great worry and sleepless nights, and they are now undecided what to do about their investment plans to expand the business, as their future is so uncertain. They had intended to provide an all-weather menage this winter, which will cost a lot of money. Should they now invest in this necessary addition to expand their riding school? Is it an investment with no return? Whilst the work into a new junction is continuing, it is very hard for them to know whether to go ahead. Until any decisions are made by Wycombe District Council and its partners regarding this junction, Mr and Mrs Curtis cannot move forward with the riding school. The fact that the junction is only an option at the moment, and Councillor Marshall acknowledges in the Cabinet report that it will not be a quick process, makes it even worse for Mr and Mrs Curtis and their family. The addition of Junction 3A is intended to create local jobs and businesses, not rescind and extinguish them. The petition also highlighted that this area of the countryside is important to preserve, as it provides a green barrier between Flatwell Heath, Loudwater and High Wycombe. A new slip road here would be a blot on the landscape, and the beautiful views from the Gom Valley, itself under threat. The topography of the land around Spring Lane is too steep to provide roads. In fact, Mrs Curtis refers to one of the fields as Cardiac Hill, owing to its potential to cause a cardiac arrest should one try to walk up it. It rises almost vertically and very steeply from the farm. The land would be changed forever, as it would have to be cut and levelled, which is acknowledged in the Jacobs report, as well as one or more properties being demolished through CPOs. Whilst they understand and appreciate that to Wycombe District Council this is just an option that is being explored at this stage, to Mr and Mrs Curtis it is not only their home, which they love, and where they thought they would live for the rest of their lives, it is also their livelihood, which they now have no idea whether they will be able to continue to run, and in fact it's their whole life. Mrs Curtis recently said to me, "My life at the moment is in limbo, along with a lot of other residents. As a community leader, it's my job to speak up for my residents. Wycombe District Council are considering demolishing people's homes and lives for this slip road. We would all urge Wycombe District Council to conclude their Junction 3A deliberations quickly and put paid to any options of putting it anywhere near this area. If a new junction is required, then please investigate other options which would not have such far-reaching consequences on so many local residents. Thank you."
Thank you very much, Councillor. Very well put and very passionate for your ward. Councillor Marshall, I know we have given a fairly comprehensive reply and there's a proposed decision here. Do you want to add a few words to this?
I'll just put a few words in, Leader, if I may. And it's one of those things, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. If you're thinking about something, we're being very open and upfront and putting it in the public domain. We are extremely aware of the sensitivity of these matters, but it's also been put forward by the Local Enterprise Partnership. It is now totally in the hands of the Highways Authority, and we are trying to get an early decision on whether that is to be something taken seriously as a consideration or whether it will be rejected. Difficult situation, I do appreciate.
Thank you very much. Any other Cabinet members wish to comment on this? Councillor Knight, you put your hand up. Can I understand the relevance of why you're asking this? This is a ward-specific matter, and Ms Woods put a very good petition forward, so I'd like to understand why you want to speak on this matter.
Thank you, Leader. It's just because it's linked to this matter about Junction 3 and the fact you're looking for a decision on Junction 3A. That I have asked on several occasions about the opportunity to do a similar feasibility study on opening up junction 3 and never really got a clear answer. So it was just to make that point. It may not be the time to answer that now, but if you could come back to me about that, as it's something I've asked about a few times now.
Yes, thank you. I'm aware of that. We will come back to you. We have an answer on it, and we did get some information. I think how was relayed at the previous council meeting, I think. But I'll get Councillor Marshall to come back with the answer we got from the HA on that thing. Cabinet, there's a proposed decision on page 13. That's set out in your papers. Are you happy to approve that? Sorry, Councillor.
Excuse me, Leader, I actually did ask to speak on
you
this.
Did.
As an adjoining ward member, it's impacted.
Sorry, Councillor. I'll put the same question I put to Councillor Knight, and that is, this is not in your ward. This is a ward-specific issue about Cobbles Farm. Very well put by Miss Wood. Unless it's going to be, I don't want to start introducing any completely different topics to do with your ward, which I know is adjacent to this.
No, this is a point of information on this that has recently surfaced. If I may.
Sorry, these are questions, they're not points of information.
Yeah,
do you have a question?
It's a question that'll come out as a point of information.
You have 1 minute to get it out.
I happened to attend, as you did, a business breakfast, and Martin Tett, leader of Bucks, spoke. And a member of the public asked a question with regards to the congestion in Wycombe and the various other things, and he mentioned Junction 3, which is why I raised this. He said, I've no solution to the congestion and there's no plans or funds to improve road structures. Therefore, the whole question of Junction 3A, and possibly reserved sites when we talk about them, comes into question. Please can somebody throw some light as to why the leader of Bucks is saying he doesn't have funds for this?
Sorry, I don't speak for the leader of Bucks. It's not relevant to the matter in hand. As I said, I repeat it for the third time, Miss Woods put a very eloquent proposition forward, which has now been accepted by the council, and this cabinet will now vote on it. So we agreed on the decision set out on page 13. Agreed, Cabinet? Thank you. Right, moving then to agenda item 5, reserve site. Councillor Baines.
I do have a point of order, Leader. I'm not satisfied that the constitution of this council has been satisfied in the constitution of this meeting tonight, and the question period allowed for members is entirely insufficient. We have 1 minute in which to place questions before this body. We have no expectation, we have no right of hearing any reply, and we certainly have no chance of following up the questions. I don't believe it serves any purpose. And for that reason, I will not be taking any further part in the meeting. You will be pleased to hear. I'm not prepared to wait 5, 10, 15 minutes to have my 60 seconds and not get through any number of points I would like to raise. The party, my Labour group, has a press release we're going to give to the press after this meeting, and that will contain all the points we wish to make. People are welcome to read it, either in the Bucks Free Press if they choose to publish it, and certainly on our website if the Bucks Free Press don't. Thank you.
Yeah. Right, thank you for that. Councillor Bates, we'll move on to item 5 then. The first decision in the Cabinet papers is set out on page 16, and it's to consider the recommendations of the Task and Finish group on this matter. Can we have 1 meeting, please? That's set out in Appendix 5, pages 72 to 73. These 3 recommendations have been considered, and the Cabinet responses are included in the report. Councillor Mrs Mallon, you were chair of this Task and Finish group. Do you wish to speak on this matter?
Yes, please, Chairman. The leader, sorry. May I do it now? This Task and Finish group reviewed the minutes of the Cabinet meeting on this subject, and we realised that this release of these sites was the least worst option, and therefore we supported option 5 rather than any of the others. This meant we brought up 3 options, 3 points to be considered, and in the report the Cabinet has responded to them, but if I may highlight those to the meeting. We hope that continuing meaningful engagement of communities and local members through the proposed liaison groups and round table groups will continue to ensure the appropriate scale of development and infrastructure is provided for each of the reserve sites. Point 2, balancing the provision of additional housing with the protection of appropriate employment sites to ensure the district maintains a proper balance between homes and job creation opportunities. The third point we raised was, in addition to the reserve sites, that the local plan review specifically consider the provision of future housing in the rest of the district, particularly rural areas, with affordable housing being seen as a key component of housing developments. We hope that it goes into smaller living areas like small villages, so that brings more life into those villages and the young people can stay there rather than it becoming a dead, ageing population. And that was our deliberations.
Thank you very much. Cabinet members, any further questions or points you want to raise on this this matter? So it has been, we have discussed it and come up with the recommendations, or answers to recommendations. Anything else you wish to add to this? Councillor Green?
Thank you, Leader. Only to welcome the point 2 about balancing the provision of housing with protection of employment sites. I mean, obviously, with the remit I have in the council, keeping employment sites and encouraging businesses to expand and to increase employment is a very important aspect of the council's role. And we welcome, and certainly I welcome the suggestion from the Task and Finish group.
Thank you very much. I will take this recommendation along with the second one after our discussions on the next matter. So we'll just park that resolution number 1 and move to resolution number 2. This is the second item for decision set out on page 16, the consideration of the release of the reserve sites. And before I ask Councillor Marshall to take us through this item, some introductory comments from me. Let me start by saying this, as we all know, is an extremely difficult decision for us to take. It's a very important and difficult issue. And we understand that the release of our reserve sites is controversial for some of those people living near to them. And we're under no illusions as to the strength of local concern. But sometimes we have to make difficult judgments and tough choices in the wider interest of the district. And I would suggest also in relation to reserve sites, ultimately in the local interest by getting the best outcomes for planning for those sites. There has been some concern about the fact that this decision is being made by the Cabinet and not the full Council, but I can assure you this is fully in accordance with the Council Constitution, and indeed this is exactly what the Cabinet was designed for. As a previous example of this decision-making process, in 2011 a decision was made not to proceed with a major project at Booker Airpark for the benefit of the whole district, and that was made by only 4 Cabinet members. I'm also inviting questions from other councillors this evening to ensure that all the issues are fully explored before making a decision. As Councillor Marshall will explain shortly, these sites are already reserved for development in our current plan, the core strategy, and thus the principle of development has already been established. We have been very open and transparent about this issue over the past few months and have widened the debate beyond Cabinet and beyond Cabinet members to members generally and the community as a whole. 2 sessions were held at the Bucks-New University in August and more recently at the Royal Grammar School. Additionally, a further briefing was held at the Hub at the end of last month. Councillor Marshall, the Head of Planning and other senior officers have met with many parish councils and other interested organisations to explain why we're having to make this decision on the reserve sites. Councillor Marshall will also explain about the necessity for long-term requirement for housing and how the release of the reserve sites fits into that process. These numbers are being driven by policies of the coalition government, and this is a policy also being supported by the Labour Party, as was seen only last week by a report called the Lyons Report, which was prepared for them and published last Thursday. More worryingly, this report also talks about the possible use of green belt, and whilst this needs to be looked at in more detail, this council has always had a policy of resisting inappropriate development in green belt. As I said at the beginning, housing developments of any sort can be an emotive issue, and we want to address the solutions for reserve sites in a structured manner, using locally established groups to prepare development briefs and to look at the infrastructure issues. So with that in mind, I'll hand over to Councillor Marshall to go through the issues in some more detail.
Thank you, Leader. Earlier this year, we held a major consultation across the district on the new local plan, setting out the big challenge, which is delivering housing to meet our objectively assessed need, and was perhaps the biggest of these challenges. Our consultation material was quite explicit about the reserve sites, and that we expect to see the reserve sites developed in the next few years. And we know that that was not a popular message. Changes have occurred nationally over the first half of this year with the introduction of the National Planning Policy Guidance, particularly in relation to the 5-year housing land supply being based on our objectively assessed need rather than our old targets which were derived from the South East Plan. This means that we must deliver somewhere between 500 and 700 houses per year rather than the 400 previously, and realistically we must be close to the middle of that range. This supply rate must be backdated to the origin of the data, which was the census of 2011, which leaves us with a significant shortfall. The longer term solution lies in the delivery and approval of the new local plan, but this is a lengthy process because of the complexities of the duty to cooperate with our neighbouring authorities, and in the meantime we are required to maintain a 5-year supply, leaving us with a stark choice. The key issue for this Cabinet to decide is whether to stand back and leave it to developers to come in with their applications for the sites, as is happening up and down the country, or to try to set the agenda for how they are developed in order that we and local residents can shape the future of those sites. Remember that the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, states that there is now a presumption in favour of sustainable development. I would prefer to be seeing these sites being progressed through the new local plan, but failure of authorities up and down the country to get their plans past planning inspectors because of not fulfilling the duty to cooperate, see Ailes Prevail for example, means that we have to be realistic on timescales, and currently we are looking at late 2017 or even 2018. The reserve sites have been reserved for future development for a very long time. They have all been reserved for development, albeit with varying terminology used, for the last 25 years. Development has been anticipated on most of them since 1954, when the Green Belt was first established and they were excluded from it. The principle of development of the sites, as the leader has said, has already been established through previous plans and been tested by the planning inspectors at various points in time. Calls to add some of the sites into the Green Belt over the last 25 years have been rejected by planning inspectors. We have talked a lot about retaining control and managing the process. And whilst there is never going to be total control, doing nothing or a partial response will mean that the control that we do have will be lost. Control is partly about our strategic defence against speculative development proposals coming in across the district, but also, more importantly, about how these sites are developed. We have therefore created an opportunity to work proactively with local people and also, rightly, with the developers to bring forward the best solutions for these sites, for what goes on the sites and the infrastructure to support them. We would set the framework for this in development briefs. That is why we will set up liaison groups per site and a round table group to look at the overall impact on infrastructure across Wycombe, which is absolutely key to this issue. This is not about concreting over every blade of grass, but developing sensitively, recognising that there are some significant constraints that need to be taken into account, and retaining green open space for the benefit of existing and future residents. We have considered the various options, and these are set out in the report, but option 5, to release the sites for development in a way that I have described, is the recommended option now before Cabinet, and that is the only one that delivers our objectives. Let me just say that I have taken this through the Planning Advisory Authority, the Planning Advisory Service, and discussed the issues with the Chief Inspector of the Planning Inspectorate, who is himself an ex-Wycombe man. The leader, along with the other leaders of the county, has also taken this matter to the Government Minister. But we are, at the end of the day, where we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that summary, and of course there are some 50-odd pages of notes and supporting documentation, which talks about the workshops and the comments we've received from residents, and I know we've received quite a lot of letters which have been circulated when we had them over the last few days as well, talking about some of the issues here. I did agree that other council members would be given 1 minute to speak or ask a question on this resolution. A number have already indicated to me that they wish to speak. I'll take those first, and then I'll take any other member who's in the room who hasn't asked me previously. So the first person who wanted to ask a question, I think Councillor Marshall will take questions one at a time. First one is Councillor Shakespeare, please.
Thank you. I'm asking the Cabinet to reject the recommendation to release the Gombe Valley for housing development. Although the valley has long been included in the list of reserved sites, previous councils have always been reluctant to release it for development because of the enormous environmental and social value. And not very long ago, this council was of the opinion that the valley should be redesignated as Green Belt. Nothing has changed since then except government guidance on how to calculate our own housing targets. You remember that at the recent public consultation, around 750 local families objected to the Gombe Valley being handed over to the developers. That's an awful lot of residents that we are here to serve, not to ignore. I'm sure that the recommendation comes from the best professional advice, follow government's guidance, but just for once, please let's remember what the local in local government means and do what our residents want us to do rather than what the government wants us to do. Please remove the Gombe Valley from the development list.
Thank you very much. Councillor Marshall, do you want to come back on that?
It's a difficult one. We attempted to put the Gombe Valley back in the Green Belt the last time round, and it was rejected by the inspector. The actual pressure on housing now is greater than it was at that time, and it is, as I say, in our core strategy, the principle of development is accepted on it, and if we haven't got a 5-year supply, it's crucial that we have to have a 5-year supply. If you haven't got that, we haven't got a defence. It's simple as that.
Thank you. Councillor Miss Wood.
Thank you. My residents in Tyler's Green and Loudwater hear the arguments but are not convinced. We don't believe the Gombe Valley should be released. The strength of local opinion shown at public meetings, together with 786 mostly adverse responses to the local plan consultation, should be heeded. Wycombe District Council stated in 2007 that there should be no development on the Gombe Valley because of its high landscape value, and that any development would destroy its integrity and remove the separation of High Wycombe from Tyler's Green. What's changed? It is a unique piece of landscape, lost forever if developed. Strong reasons not to include the Gombe Valley. Eric Pickles this week said that councils can decide where development should and shouldn't go in consultation with local people. To release the Gombe Valley is against our wishes, and we have had no part of the decision to release this valued green lung. Local roads are already congested. A personal journey last Thursday took 35 minutes to drive Cock Lane to the A40. Not an unusual occurrence. If we cannot prevent the release of this site, then sustainable infrastructure must be agreed first. Is the need for the numbers of housing quotas secure, and can we be sure of the methodology used to produce the numbers? It is acknowledged that they are still a moving feast.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. Your minute's up. Councillor Marshall.
Thank you, Councillor Woods. It's very much the same as the last one. I'm afraid the principle of development on the site is already in our core strategy. We haven't got a choice of that. The whole purpose that we're trying to set down is to get these liaison groups together and the round tables in order to deliver the infrastructure that's required to support it.
Thank you. I'm sure infrastructure will come into conversation a bit later as well. Councillor Snaith, next, please.
Thank you. I'd appreciate not the same record as a response, please. I'm calling for the Gom Valley and Abbey Barn North to be removed. And why? Because in between is Wycombe Marsh and various other roads, such as London Road, that's still reeling from other developments that we've actually allowed to go through. We need a green belt review. We don't want Wycombe concreted over. Martin Tett, as I mentioned earlier, has also said he hasn't the money to do the infrastructure in the roads. So come on, would you want this in Marlow or the rural areas? I don't think so. So please, let's take those two areas out. Let's take Gom Valley out and Abbey Barn North. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Snaith. We'll try not to personalise this to where individual members live. This group here makes decisions on behalf of the whole district, so does it scrupulously. Councillor Marshall, please.
In terms of the Green Belt Review, that's part of the local plan timescale, and that's where it belongs. We can't, as I said earlier in my presentation, we can't speed that up. It's a long process, and it's not going to lay an egg until 2017, 2018. In the meantime, we are required to have this 5-year supply. As to infrastructure payments, what Martin Tett may be true for Martin Tett's pocket, but development, when it goes forward, we get money from two areas. Still the community infrastructure levy on the houses, and where site-specific stuff, it's section 106. And that's the funding source. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Langley, please.
Yes, thank you very much. From the consultation process and recent emails, the vast majority of local people are fundamentally opposed to the developing of Slate Meadow. Residents have clearly expressed their concerns. At a full council meeting, assurance was given that residents' views would be taken into account, and on their behalf I ask you to reject the inclusion of Slate Meadow from the reserved site proposal. We're going to end up with more houses than we are with jobs available. I have copies of the email if anybody would like it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure whether you can answer that. Do you make a few comments, please?
I'm trying not to be repetitive, but the residents' views, the engagement with the residents and how we shape these sites is the bit working through these liaison groups. It is the proactive way, it's our lead way of trying to influence how these sites become developed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Appleyard, please.
Policy CS8 states that before any land is released, road infrastructure should be in place. Where is the plan and where is the infrastructure? Cause End Road and Town Lane are already having great difficulties with the volume of traffic at peak times. Currently there are very large numbers of waste vehicles, container lorries and buses using these roads, none of which can pass each other without mounting the 3-foot wide pavement. The accident record in this area is 1 fatality, a large number of minor accidents, and more seriously recently, reports of young people being sucked towards the road by large vehicles moving very fast. What thought has been given to these concerns, and when have you visited the area to witness these sorts of problems? With regard to flooding, Cause End Road is already affected by flooding. Families had to move out of their homes while renovations were made this year.
Brief, Councillor.
And two have not returned.
Thank you very much. As you're aware, we did go on site visits, but we went to visit every single site and spent a whole morning and part of the afternoon doing that. I can't say we saw any refuse lorries, but I appreciate the width of Cause End Road. Councillor Marshall on page 33 does set out the point that Councillor Appleyard's just made, if you want to comment on that, please.
I think the best comment I can make, there are some particularly challenging things associated with that site. On the roads, the traffic and the flooding. And these are all things that are site specific and would be considered and may prove to be a constraint upon the development of that site. Now when you've gone through the process and actually evaluated with the professional bodies concerned just what the impact is specific to that site and how it could be mitigated, then you can make the judgment of the viability of that site, but not by any other way, by saying up front that you can't deliver it. You have to go through the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gaffney, you said you wanted to speak next. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Well, I'm going to talk about Terriers Farm, as we haven't heard about that one. I do understand the dilemma the council finds itself in through no fault of its own, so there's no need for Councillor Marshall to explain that to me. I do fully understand it. The reserve sites, and I'll talk about Terriers Farm in particular, were listed years and years and years ago, so long ago that a lot of us have even forgotten they were reserve sites, which is a problem. I would maintain that Terriers Farm, that was made a reserve site, is completely out of date, because you will recall that Wellesbourne school site development is probably the biggest development we've had for many years in the district. You will recall that many of us went to the planning inspectorate here in this room, and we lost the case. It is a very large site, and it's right next door to Terriers Farm. So I would maintain, if we'd known then, this wouldn't be a reserve site. It's created tremendous gridlock. There's a very high ageing population in there. Hazelmere is a village, technically, although I'd say it's as large as a town. So I would ask the Cabinet to consider this, my comments, before it's released.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Marshall, I've now forgotten what I was going to say, so I'll let you answer first. It was about, I think it was about the changing of the plan. The plan we've got at the moment with the reserve site in has now been set in stone for the moment. It was set a few years ago, 2011. 8, sorry. So it is set. So the changing of reserve sites at this moment is probably not possible, but you perhaps confirm that.
That's quite true, Leader. We're not in a position to negotiate on these. They are in the core strategy as development sites.
Right, thank you. Councillor Pollock, please.
Thank you, Chairman. 1,272 people signing an e-petition, hundreds writing in response to the consultation, hundreds attending public meetings, all expressing overwhelming opposition to building on Slate Meadow. Both parish councils opposing. Two communities with their own history and identity joined together forever. 2,447 dwellings already identified in your report over 5 years, 129 being proposed on the Glory Mill site, more than 500 a year. DCLG publishing a document recognising constraints of AONB and Green Belt may restrain authorities' ability to meet its needs. 28,239 cars using Cause End Road over a 24-hour period on the 15th of November 2012, a road that can't be widened, no infrastructure proposed, even though policy CS8 of our core strategy says they must be. Can the Cabinet member explain to me why it's acceptable to say that core policy says that we're going to release the sites, but when it comes to looking at infrastructure, suddenly it's changed? And can you explain to me why it is that the overwhelming needs and the overwhelming views of the majority of people in the district are being ignored both in Slate Meadow and I suspect the other sites as well? Because at the end of the day, my residents don't think WDC stands up for them.
I think Councillor Marshall has the point. Councillor Marshall, please.
I don't want to be repetitive. The process of identifying the infrastructure needs is through these liaison groups and site-specific. The principle is down in our core strategy to release when the need arises. I know that the core strategy says you put the infrastructure in place first, but you've got to define the infrastructure through a study on the site-specific.
I think just picking up the DCLG point, and Councillor Marshall touched on it, I and the leaders of the other district council did meet with ministers, and we didn't get a very good reception, as was reported in the press some weeks ago. It was, this is what the plans are, so please go and deliver, and that's not been restated by any government minister I've seen since. Right, that's the members who asked in advance. If I go around the room, are there any members who wish to speak? Councillor Mrs. Mallon, do you wish to speak? Councillor Turner? Councillor, who's that? Up there. Who's that? Oh, Councillor Savage, sorry. Councillor Savage? No, Slater. Councillor Watson, you want to speak?
Thank you very much, Leader. And who would be Leader? This is a difficult decision, if there ever was one. I certainly understand the need for a local plan. I see that the coalition government have failed to reduce the high level of immigration. I understand that Leader's been under unreasonable pressure by the planning minister. Certainly more houses are needed, but I would question the decision process. I'm afraid I have to do this. Under the cabinet structure, the Eden project was voted upon by all 60 councillors, not by 8 councillors. This is a very weighty responsibility for just 8 members to take. And I would suggest that the matter should be voted on this evening, but recommended rather than to full council. That would be my suggestion.
I think I'll note those comments, Councillor Watson. And Eden 8 was different. That was a major spend and a policy change for this government to establish a whole new centre in the town. Councillor Mrs. Jones.
Yes, thank you very much. I have a question which relates really to a lot of the questions already been asked. Several of my colleagues are wanting their particular patch removed from the reserve list. We are working on a situation where we don't know how many houses each of these reserve sites will actually contribute, or what the total number will be. If we knew that, we would know how relevant it was to keep all 5 sites in or not. So first question is, can we have those numbers, please? And I do know that the reserve sites are not going to give us the 5-year thing for very long, but it's just a breathing space, as I understand it. Secondly, Slate Meadow has been in the green belt, and Gone Meadow, we recommended the green belt. As there is to be a green belt review, may I suggest, in light of what numbers they contribute, and I don't know what that is, would it be feasible to change their status to be considered as part of the green belt review and to come in at a later date if necessary? I assume the review will take places out as well as putting them in.
Thank you very much. Councillor Marsh, you can take them. You can take that question or questions.
The figures that are indicative only. It depends on the details of the working groups, the liaison. That they are in the report. They're on page 20. Is it 26? 26. The top para 53, and it's the 12 to 1400 band. But they are indicative figures only. Greenbelt review is part of the local plan process. I can't do it any more quickly. We have to get an agreed standard with our neighbouring authorities for how we take that forward.
I think Councillor Mrs. Jones's point was, could you change the status of some of the sites we've got in the reserve sites and wait until the review comes?
The timescales don't work, I'm afraid. We are vulnerable with the 5-year suppliers, as I said earlier. If we don't release these sites, then they will have applications on them as soon as we get examined, or if not before. I'd be very surprised if we didn't have applications in within 2 months. So we're trying to be proactive and manage the process to deliver the best outcome that would come forward on these sites. That's the whole purpose. Thank you.
I thought, Councillor Marsh, you might have mentioned in your introduction at Aylesbury Vale, who've had their local plan thrown out, and the result is?
10,000 on appeal. 10,000 houses on appeal at the moment.
So if you haven't got your plans in place, that's the sort of thing that can be imposed only by planning inspectors, hence why we're having this discussion today. Councillor Barnes, yours. Councillor Pearce.
Thank you, Leader. A couple of silly questions you may think, but I'm staggered by this 1 minute rule, which seems absolutely ludicrous and it's gagging people, and to me it's totally wrong and undemocratic. The other thing is, what would happen if we did not meet these criteria of the housing number? What would actually happen on that one? And the other thing is, I think what you're trying to do is to divide and conquer. You're putting one community against another. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The 1 minute rule that everyone keeps referring to, and as you're fully aware, that members may only speak at this meeting if I agreed, but at council you only have 1 minute rule there, so it's no different from the council meeting. That was agreed just recently, so it's no different from what we do at the council. Do you want to answer, Councillor Pearce?
On the trying to pick off one against another, no, we're putting them all forward together, one for one, one for all, the old musketeers. We need all of these sites to get anywhere near the numbers for the 5-year supply. We need each and every one of them. If we didn't put one forward, if we withheld one, then the developer on that side is going to say, why don't you put mine in then? And he would just put his application in. He wouldn't bother with this working group, the liaison group, to develop the brief for the site. He would just come straight in with an application. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Farmer, would you speak?
Yes, I was going to ask a question, but being as I know what the answer is going to be, I won't bother.
Well, we don't know what the question was, we can't give you an answer, but you have the opportunity. Councillor Collum, please.
Thank you, Leader. I'm the local member for Terriers and Amersham Hill Ward, and so wish to speak about Terriers Farm. Now, you'll note from page 35 of your report, this is the only reserved site which has been the subject of an application and appeal, which the council won on the grounds the housing need could be met from brownfield development. Well, this is no longer a defence, as your report spells out. I therefore support option 5, which provides the best protection for local residents, members and interest groups to ensure a development of quality. Now, I do, however, query why in paragraph 72, community engagement proposals, only the Slate Meadow Liaison Group would be permitted to comment on infrastructure. I believe all liaison groups should be able to do so, as they know the local area and are best placed to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Councillor Marshall explained there is a reason for that.
Thank you, Councillor Coleman. We were not expressly trying to exclude comment. The proposal for a Wycombe-wide round table was to take in the overall impact across Wycombe as a whole. But each site can have site-specific concerns on its own infrastructure, by certain. And it was not intended to exclude that at all. Sorry, misunderstand.
Thank you. Any more questions from Councillor Liswell?
Thank you, Leader. What a horrible dilemma. I represent a ward, Bowerdine, where many of the residents are desperate for housing. There's overcrowding, young people needing housing, local people who've been on the housing waiting list for a very long time. But on the other hand, I've lived in Wycombe all my life. I've lived in Hazelmere, Tyler's Green and the town centre, and I represent Micklefield on the county council. Frankly, I love all these sites. I like all of them, and I don't think any of them should be put forward at the moment. Why? Politics, politics, politics. We've got a general election coming up. All the major parties have let down on the housing agenda. So let's do nothing, number one. Let's not do anything until we have an assessment of the infrastructure or there's been in a general election, and see what the next coalition's policy is going to be.
More of a statement, but I know infrastructure will be coming up. I'll talk about infrastructure very shortly. Councillor Knight, please.
Thank you, Leader. As one of the councillors from Micklefield, I represent the residents of Pimsgrove and Cock Lane who are absolutely against the idea of building in the beautiful Gone Valley, and I have to say I agree with them. On the other hand, as Councillor Wassell has already said, I come across a lot of local families who are in need of good quality affordable homes, and I must represent them as well. However, my concern is that the obscene cost to our countryside and those who cherish it of releasing these sites offers no clear benefit to those people who need good homes. There's a great danger that the only benefit to releasing these sites is to feed the demands of the London housing shortage and the pockets of property developers. So, to be honest, if I'm not convinced that this is really going to meet that local need for local homes, for local people, then I can't support this. And I would like you to answer, my question would be, how can you convince me of that, really? And also, as has already been said, the infrastructure issue, East Wycombe can't take it, and why has there been no plan? Thank you.
Thank you. So infrastructure, we will come back on the numbers, and Councillor Marshall can comment a bit further. Of course, these are predictions. We don't know where the people are coming from. They're just growth in population that are given by the Office of National Statistics. Do you want to comment any further on that, Councillor Marshall?
I think our officer can probably respond on the migration issue and the balance on the numbers. The majority of our growth, as I've said previously, is in the over 65s, and I don't think they're migrating, but I'll hand over to Ian for that.
Mr. Mackler, you have to comment?
Thank you, Councillor Marshall. Yes, in terms of where the people are predicted to come from, the vast majority of the growth in the population, the number of households who need homes, would come from within the existing Wycombe District population. There is, these are the official the statistics that come both from national statistics, but also our own consultants' advice who've done forecasts of how the population will grow up to 2031. There is an element of migration in those figures, and we have to include migration within our assessment of our overall housing need. That is a requirement of the National Planning Policy Framework, but the vast majority is still what you would call indigenous growth.
Thank you very much for that information. Right, there are other members in the room, so I'll turn now to Cabinet members who wish to speak. Perhaps I'll just start the ball rolling, Councillor Marshall. We're here discussing these reserve sites. Am I right in assuming that developers can come in tomorrow with applications for any of these sites and not wait for developer briefs? But the point of doing the developer briefs is it does give us some protection in terms of trying to restrict the numbers or the type of development.
Thank you, Leader. That's absolutely true. The developers could come in tomorrow with an application. But we have been engaging with the developers as well as with the public with a view to getting their buy-in to the process of the development brief. It's not straightforward, but it does give them a bit of an assurance, a bit of insurance, if you like, on a positive way of working together to try and reach a reasonable, amenable solution to what is not an easy challenge.
As regards the development briefs, can you explain how those would work and how residents and other organisations would participate in those?
We would. The idea is we set up a small team with a chairman who may be independent. We haven't decided yet. We'd also use local councillors, ward members, parish councils, and the public, county council, highways, inputs wherever, and they would actually look in detail about how these sites could be developed, the type of housing they could accommodate, the issues involved in bringing those sites forward, to try and work through the issues, to try and manage the best possible solution.
Am I right in assuming that methodology was used for the Dawes Hill development, which has now got full planning permission?
It was indeed.
Right, thank you. Do you want to start, Councillor Mrs. Teasdale?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I'm a local girl. This town means the world to me. The countryside does as well.
And we're put in a very, very difficult situation. We have had this forced on us. We've had this forced on us by government, and we have to respond. And the only way I can see of responding to this is by us keeping the control, because if we don't keep the control, it goes out of the way, then we are really going to see things we don't want. So the only reason I would even contemplate supporting this tonight is the fact that I feel that we should be doing exactly that. We should be doing it as we did in Dawes Hill. Make sure that local people are involved in the decision making, and it did work there. I was on the committee when we worked on that, and there was lots of things done through negotiation with the developers that actually, by talking to local people that knew the area, we got done. And I think we really made the best of a bad job again. We had to do it. We had no choice. It's a really awful situation to be in. We walked all these sites. They are beautiful. I've lived in Wycombe Green. I know it very well, and I know Slate Meadow. I do have concerns about the flooding situation down there, and I think that could almost be a no-no there. That's for the developers. We need to have that looked at, because even though we can look at these sites, there may be reasons why they can't be developed. All we're saying tonight is we will look at them, but we need to keep our hand on the tiller as far as I'm concerned. I want to come and work with people to get the best for you in your area. I am genuinely concerned, but we haven't anything. If we don't do it, the developers will come in and we will not have a chance. So I want us to work together to get the best possible that we can for the electorate. And I hate to be in this situation, and I feel really sorry for the local members. I've been in this situation in my own ward and had to fight for what I believed in. So believe me, it's with a heavy heart that I have to accept this, but the only way of doing it, I believe, is for us to make sure that we have got our hand on the tiller and we are making the decisions with you, the local people, so that you really do get something you can be not happy with but can live with. That's the important thing. And of course we must make sure we keep plenty of open spaces. That's absolutely vital. We don't want to see a concrete jungle from here to from one end of the town to the other. It's got to be done sensitively, and I do believe if you help us, work with us, share the burden with us so that we can help you to get the best we possibly can. And this is why I think I will be supporting this recommendation today, because I believe it's the only way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments, very helpful. Councillor McCarthy, please.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I think a lot of what has been said before, and no doubt will be said again, is that this is not of our making, this situation. It is a decree from central government. We have an obligation to comply with that. That is what the planning system says, although one might argue it has been skewed to give developers some stronger hand than we've hitherto been used to. So really this resolution does provide us with the most pragmatic way out of what is a very, very difficult situation. As one of my electorates said to me this morning, you weren't elected to do this, were you? And I felt I had some sort of feeling there as well. But that is the perception of the public. Now, one other thing that's come across to me, Leader, is that the electorate generally still don't buy into the numbers. So we have to make that very clear to our electorate, that this is a genuine local need. The demographics of the district have changed radically since we did our early builds in the 60s, which actually were very similar to what we're doing now. We built on some beautiful land in the 1960s and 70s. That's now all residential. Hazelmere Park, for example. So we have been here before, but the circumstances have changed in the way which we deliver it. So therefore it's important that what we do here and what we have done hitherto, which is an unprecedented level of consultation with our electorate, to explain the dilemma and that central government means business. Indeed, I know only too well how badly you were treated when you attempted to put Wycomb's case for restrained growth to the Minister in Westminster, and I think that's something that we should bear in mind. Now, one of the things that's running through this consultation and indeed comment tonight is this common thread of public consultation, particularly regarding infrastructure. Leader, both the MPPF and the new planning guidance make it clear that any development must be sustainable and have adequate infrastructure. And indeed, our own planning policy requires the full provision of infrastructure before any development takes place. That was embedded in our core strategy in 2008. Similarly, sustainability is ill-defined in the MPPF. I think all of us know what we think we mean by sustainability, but it is ill-defined, and again it is linked very much with the loss of environment and the impact of that development upon its local and indeed probably wider infrastructure. So one of the issues that we have to ensure here is that by the formation of these local groups, all of which have local knowledge and local understanding of the particular nuances of their sites, and each site is unique in its own way. We've heard one or two specific sites tonight, but I have one in my ward which is just as important to the electorate there as indeed the others, but they all carry similar weight in that respect. We have to ensure through that process, and that's what this resolution is about tonight, that we allow the public to firmly engage in that process, and by persuasive means and by use of the planning system where appropriate, I was going to say persuade, but I would like to use a stronger word, but I don't here, that the developers need to play ball if they are going to please their shareholders in the way they expect. They want certainty. So in Appendix 3, Leader, we have very clear notes about the widespread concerns of infrastructure. I think we have a moral obligation to do that. We have a moral obligation to ensure that developers buy into that through the SIL process. That's a new system that's not been really tested at great strength before, and I think we need to ensure that it is used to the greatest effect to provide this infrastructure. I think it places a heavy burden on the planners, particularly the county council, who have frankly failed to keep up with development in the past, and we have a backlog of infrastructure that may need to be addressed before that, before the release of before the development of the reserve site starts. I think without tangible infrastructure, development is unacceptable to the public at large. And also, I think the environmental impact of unrestrained growth in our district has to be addressed. I think there's a fine line between being a good place to live, it's our strap line, isn't it, and an unrestrained conurbation. I think we edge ever closer to the latter. Now, the impact of traffic flows is demonstrated daily. My own village, Leader, if I may digress, has seen a 38% increase in traffic since 2011. And similarly, some of the reserve sites have suffered development around them that was not envisaged when the core strategy was put in place. I think, therefore, Leader, in our documents tonight, we have on page 33 a very clear statement that spells out under policy CS8, that is our adopted policy, that, I think if I can find it, I'll read it out because I think the electorate ought to be aware of that. This was embedded in the core strategy in 2008, and it says, it refers to the release of the reserve sites, it lists them all. Before the release of any land at these locations, all necessary infrastructure will need to be provided, including solutions that deliver sustainable transport modes and minimises congestion. I think, Leader, that gives us some quite strong markers to put down when we engage with the developers at this consultation process. I think one of the other things I just would like to say, Leader, that this has probably been one of the most difficult decisions that this Cabinet has had to wrestle with. I think that the district expects us to be firm in our decisive in our thinking, and I think therefore, Leader, I would be quite prepared to support this resolution subject to the qualifications that I and no doubt others will make tonight. Thank
Councillor Mrs. Adey.
Of course, I know that we need homes for people, but I have to say I am very unhappy about this rotten decision that's being forced on us by the coalition government. If these sites are released, how can we be sure that we'll get the development briefs we want? It seems there's no insurance, is there? And I seem to think that the core strategy policy CS8 actually says the infrastructure should be in place before releasing the sites. Is that not so? Turning to Slate Meadow, if built on, this will take out the green space between the villages. This will disappear. What can be done here? Also, would there be enough SIL monies from just 150 to 190 houses to pay for the infrastructure needed? And last but not least, the big issue of flooding. Do we want more flooding to larger areas of Bourne End and probably Woburn than last year, with the cost to the council, the taxpayer, the emergency services and the heartbreak it brings to those affected? I can only hope, if this site is released, that the Environment Agency will find against Slate Meadow being built on after carrying out a flood risk assessment. And if the decision is passed tonight, I should want to work very hard to work for the best outcomes for all the sites. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The flooding issue is very important, and as one who actually lives in the flood zone, I know what the problems are. And I understand that the Environment Agency are taking quite a tough line now on developments in floodplains following last winter's flooding. Councillor Marshall, sorry, I should have asked if you want to come back, and there'll be 3 speakers at this stage, or sum up at the end. Thank you for your comments over there. Councillor Foster, please.
Well, thank you, Leader. Yes, I share many of my Cabinet colleagues' thoughts that this is a big decision. I think, from my perspective, it's important to put that into some sort of perspective, in that if Wycombe District Council was the only council in the country that was facing this issue, I'd feel much more isolated. I don't think we are. The policies and the statutory requirements that we have to operate within are set by national government and currently by the coalition government. Now, I'm no apologist for central government, but I think I have some empathy for the fact that if you look at the data which was eloquently presented by Ms. Pollitt in the consultation documents and in the presentations, the reality is that there has been an inexorable growth in demand for housing at a national level, and there has been significant constraints in terms of supply to satisfy that demand. What does all this mean? It means that I think we shouldn't be blinking in the headlights and say, how on earth did we get here? Because I think we got here as a result of many, many years of accumulated growth in demand and issues with supply. So what's changed? I think up until very recently, and Councillor Marshall has eloquently described the changes such as the MPP-F and then the MPP-G and the significant change of emphasis over objectively assessed need, overlaid with the behaviour of planning inspectors. Now, what does all that mean? It means that up until now, I believe that Wycombe District Council has had a robust framework for effectively managing the process of development across the district. But the rules have changed. We are not in control of those rules, just as other councils are not in control of those rules. So we either do one of 2 things. We either stick our head in the sand and say, you know, doom and gloom, there's nothing we can do, or we try to figure out the best possible way for us to respond to the changing environment. Now, there's been talk and there's been suggestion in this chamber tonight and elsewhere that members are being led by officers in a sort of bureaucratic sleepwalk towards disaster, and we're simply following a rule book that says you must do this, and that we're all automatons and we're incapable of independent thought. Now, clearly, from my perspective, I would object to that notion. But on behalf of pretty much all the other members, I'd say it is simply not true. Other members have mentioned what I deem to be unprecedented levels of public engagement and engagement with other stakeholders over this. There's been a massive amount of input, most of it, well, no, I'm going to change that. All of it valuable. Not all of it in support, but all of it, I believe, is of immense value because it helps guide us in the way that we make the decision and, more importantly, the way that we implement the decision that we will ultimately make. Now, I've got one more comment to make, and I'd like to ask Councillor Marshall to actually answer a question. My belief is that Wycombe District Council has a duty. We have a duty to provide the best possible framework and the environment for effectively managing housing and other developments across the district. Now, on balance, and taking everything into account, considering the changes, considering the fact that there has been a long-standing, historical, and often tested and approved programme of reserve sites, I believe we're at the point where the best interest of the district can only be served by releasing the reserve sites. I go further. I'd say that I think strategically we would be making a grave error if we didn't do this, because we would then be continually on the back foot. We'd be playing Aylesbury Vale, where are we going to put those 10,000 houses? That is not a game I believe this district should be playing. So the question I'd like to ask Councillor Marshall, because I think there's a thread that I've identified which I think is erroneous. Could you please confirm that the release of the sites for potential development does not mean that all considerations relating to the normal planning framework, for example, the normal planning rules, flooding, infrastructure, yada yada, that all of those are simply not swept by to one side if we take the action to release the reserve sites?
Councillor Marshall, please.
Thank you for that, Councillor Foster. It's quite the opposite. It gives us a stronger hand in how we manage each site. Rather than being on the back foot, we're in the front foot and want control. That's the whole purpose of what we're putting forward. It is a terrific challenge, and it's one that we are committed to try and manage to the best endeavours for the district as a whole. That's the whole purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hussain, do you wish to ask a question?
Thank you, Leader. I would just like to say that, first of all, I can see the concern from all the members that we should take all the 5 sites out. And I can say that we had a similar problem when the Dawes Hill development was going on, and everybody was saying that we should take it, and we fought everything that we should do maximum. But we had a very good support from the Dawes Hill neighbourhood forum, and all the people participated and made it a good as we could. Much better than we could talk about Wellesbourne, where the Wellesbourne has been so sort of not properly put up. And I think we've got to make a decision best interest of this council and the residents. And I think it will be difficult. I think that we've got to follow the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Green, please.
Thank you, Leader. Today is one of those days that I hoped would never come, as I have one of the reserve sites in my ward at Terriers Farm, a site I've always defended against development. An application was submitted to develop Terriers Farm in 2005, and with my colleagues and local residents we argued against the need for the site to be released for development. We were successful, and the council rejected the application, which was then appealed and finally called in by the then Secretary of State, who supported the refusal. And I'd just like to highlight a couple of things in her refusal judgment. It says that one of the reasons for the refusal was that there is a demonstrable supply of deliverable housing for between 5.3 to 6 years. Can I remind everyone this judgment was made over 6 years ago, and I think that is a key indicator as to why we are where we are. Given the Terriers site has in one of its proposals a park and ride there, I'd like to just highlight what the Secretary of State said about park and ride. She says that a future park and ride scheme is a limited and disputed benefit that should not override other considerations. And there is no firm commitment to the park and ride scheme on behalf of the county or district councils. I believe we should make sure that that proposal is completely scrapped. And can I finally say out of her judgment that we've been talking about infrastructure, and she said then that the infrastructure considerations that were put in the refusal would not in themselves warrant the dismissal of the appeal, but would merit further consideration in any similar future development proposals for this site. So it was recognised then that infrastructure was important and would be taken into account in any future application. Leader, I understand the anguish of residents who live near all the reserve sites, all of which I have visited. In an ideal world, I'd like to see them all continue as open space. They are different in their appearances and characteristics, but are all precious to their local communities. But unfortunately, we do not live in an ideal world. We have to live in a real world where we have to take account of factors totally outside our control. This includes population and household growth, as well as migration. The very factors that make Wycombe an attractive and vibrant place to live also mean that there is a desire from other people to live here. Some of this is caused by families growing and children leaving home to start their own families, and some is due to inward migration from other parts of this country as well as other parts of the world. So we have to face the reality that more homes need to be built. Many of us dispute the numbers that we are told we need to provide, but there is a clear need for more housing, especially low-cost housing that will enable our young people to remain in Wycombe, rather than to have to move elsewhere. So the question is, where do we build these homes? Wycombe is a highly constrained district, with much of the undeveloped land in the AONB or Green Belt. We have successfully developed on brownfield sites over the past few years, but the supply of these sites has almost dried up. Some people have suggested building on employment land, but I would be totally opposed to that. Much of our employment land has already been built on for housing, and that which is left is needed for businesses to grow. Wycombe needs a balance of housing and employment sites, or else businesses cannot find space to expand and will move out of the district, reducing employment opportunities for our residents. This only leaves the reserve sites and the unprotected land around Prince's Risborough. The risk in not identifying the land which can be built on is that we will have planning on appeal, as we have started to see in other parts of the country. This, I believe, would be a disaster, because developers would go for maximising their return on the site, resulting in high-density development with no regard to the local environment. I have a good example of this in my own ward at Wellesbourne, where an application turned down by this council was allowed by Hazel Blears, the then Secretary of State. I would not want to see similar developments inflicted on other parts of this district. The reserve sites have been earmarked for housing for many years, so it should be no surprise to anyone that we now have to come to this decision. I believe that the only way we can have any control over the development of these sites is to release them for development, but to ensure that each site has a development brief produced with input from local people and residents groups that takes into account each site's special features and ensures that all required infrastructure is identified. I appreciate that this will not please everyone, but I believe it is the only way we can provide the homes that are needed without allowing unfettered development.
Thank you very much. Do you wish to go back on that, Councillor Marsh? Are you happy as it is?
Thank you, Leader. Difficult times. I think one of the things that we haven't mentioned is perhaps the fact that these sites wouldn't all be brought forward in haste at the same time. There's progressive development. Many of them wouldn't be developed out within the 5-year period. It'd be progressive development through the period. The other thing is that the majority of these sites would retain a significant amount of open space. That is one of the objectives of managing it through these development briefs, that we retain a significant amount of open space within them. It is difficult, and we're asking Wycombe to take somewhere between 12 and 1400. But bear in mind, we're also asking Risborough to take twice that many. And just think of the impact on Risborough. And we want to be managing that growth at Risborough, not reacting, not losing control. That's another thing. We're looking at perhaps 2,500 homes on the line on the other side of the railway line at Risborough. And it's important that we have a defence against speculative development in that area as well. So that is the reason why we want to go for a structured approach to manage how these sites come forward. It is not easy.
Thank you very much, Cabinet members, for those comments. Councillor Mrs Clark, we had members' questions earlier, but I know you're at a meeting, so I'm very happy if you want to have your 1 minute of questions or comments now.
Thank you very much indeed, Leader. I think we are all very well aware of what happened on the Dawes Hill site. It was a brownfield site, and we were told that we were going to have 550 houses on that site. And it was through working with the residents of the Residents Association of Dawes Hill, School Close, Fairview, Fairridge, that we put together a neighbourhood forum. And from that neighbourhood forum, we came in and we spoke to planning departments here. I will say that they weren't particularly helpful. In fact, if anything, I would say that they were totally and utterly unhelpful. And I think that sort of led the way to the people up there insisting that they wanted to be involved with what they were doing. I know that we came and we fought the council. We went to judicial review because the area that we had chosen wasn't the right one. We were told
Your minute's up, Mrs Clark.
Yes,
Can you breathe, please?
And the housing was put in. I think that you now have the opportunity of allowing people here on all these sites the ability to decide what they want with a planning department that now listens to the local community. And I think that that is the only way forward that we can go. Infrastructure has to be part of that. And I do think that anything that we do, we have to listen to the people and the communities that are there. And local members must be involved in that as well.
Thank
they
you.
know their
Thank you very much. Some wise words there. Right. Just to, I think, to sum up what I've heard this evening, obviously I've heard a lot of statements from members and from Cabinet members specifically, some very impassioned views. All Cabinet members have seen the various correspondence that's been sent to them from residents and indeed council members as well. Some very passionate statements and some very helpful statements indeed. But as I understand it, releasing the sites, and Councillor Marshall, correct me if I'm wrong, does not automatically mean development will take place. It means they are available for, and as you quite rightly said a few minutes ago, this may take some years, if at all. As we've seen, these sites have been sure that today's, if we make a decision the way we're suggesting here, would suddenly mean these sites would become automatically developed straight away. I hear the points about the flooding issue, and that is, as members know, it is a planning issue, but it's a very important issue. And each site would be looked at by, if and when an application came in, it would be looked at by the planning committee. And as for those people that don't know, the EA, Environment Agency, always comment on flooding issues these days. And as I said earlier, I know they've been tightening up on some of their development in what are known as floodplains. The infrastructure is probably one of the most important points I've heard today. It is set out in policy CS8, it is included in this document, and it is clearly set out in there, so there's no debate about whether we're excluding it. It is in, it has been addressed. And I think, as Mrs. Clark just finished there, that one of the most important things, and we have seen this in practice in Dawes Hill, is for if development briefs are to be established, that make sure that local members, other interested parties, and indeed residents do get involved in looking at those. And in the pack, if those have read the cabinet pack, it clearly sets out in there our sort of target or ambitions as to how much green space there would be on those sites. Now, clearly that's up for negotiation, but that's our broad parameters of trying to ensure that we don't get all these sites concreted over, which is certainly something that could happen if we didn't have a plan in place. So with that in mind, Cabinet members, there are two decisions on page 16 of your pack. The first one is the recommendation that we agree the local task and finish group, and I put that to you. Can I have a show of hands? Show of hands, please. Thank you. And item 2 is on the reserve sites. I set out on page 16 that we adopt option 5 as set out in your papers. I so put that to you. Show of hands, please. Thank you very much for your time. So I'll move on now to item 6, supplementary items that aren't any, urgent items that aren't any, and there aren't any exempt supplementary items or exempt